Who is piloting the UAPs or UFOs constantly seen in our skies? Where are they from? Why are they here? How long have they been here? What is their mission on planet Earth? Do they come in peace, or do they have more sinister motives? Join Mad Mark as he uncovers the answers to these questions and many more of the mysteries that puzzle us all on Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. And now, here's Mad Mark. Today's episode: what was the secret reason for the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, and what did they find there? Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. I'm Mad Mark, and before I begin, just a reminder to please like, share, and comment. It helps so much I can't even tell you. I would also like to mention that I have created a new Facebook page specifically for this show. I put a link in the show description, so go ahead and follow me over there. I'm hoping that this will become a place where we can all gather to discuss each episode and where you can voice your comments and questions, so please check that out. Today we continue our studies of Zecharia Sitchin's third book, The Wars of Gods and Men, published by Avon Books in 1985. When we concluded episode 10, we were in the midst of various examples put forth by Mr. Sitchin of ancient battles where various texts give examples of gods taking an active role in either the battles themselves or in instructing the numerous kings on where and when to fight. We talked a lot about Marduk, or Amun-Ra, as he was known by the Egyptians, and we will continue to talk about him a lot on this program. But for now, I just want to say that the rest of Chapter 1 of this book goes on to give many more examples of instances where the gods took an active role in wars both on the battlefield and off. There are also examples of when human pride got the better of kings who ended up defying their gods and going to war against their gods' wishes, and they paid dearly for those transgressions. But as I read through all of these examples, as fascinating as they were, I came to the conclusion that they translate far better to a reader than they do to a listener or a viewer. So I highly recommend that you read them all for yourself. They are perfect examples of how the gods actually interacted with the people who worshiped them in ancient times. But for the sake of this show, I am moving forward to Chapter 2. Now, let's return to ancient Egypt. There is an inscription on the walls of the great temple at Edfu, an ancient Egyptian holy city dedicated to the god Horus. Who was Horus? He was the son of Isis and Osiris. And who were they? Well, none other than Inanna Ishtar and Dumuzi. Inanna Ishtar, sister of Apollo Shamash Utu and granddaughter of Enlil, which means that Horus is Enlil's great-grandson. Egyptian traditions hold that Horus established a foundry of divine iron, which included a special enclosure where a great winged disk was kept. According to an Egyptian text, when the doors of the foundry opened, the disk riseth up. Could this be a depiction of the first ever flying saucer? And it is dated to a time well before the pharaohs, from a time when the gods reigned over Egypt, or Kemet. The texts tell us that His Majesty Ra-Marduk was in the land of Ken, accompanied by his warriors. Evidently, there were enemies in the land at that time who were conspiring to steal the luminous crown of lordship. So, these enemies were obviously some other god or gods. Now, this boat was not some ordinary craft. It was, in fact, the winged disk stored in Horus's district. One thing that I would like to make very clear at this point is that all of this took place before Marduk Amun-Ra was a leader in Egypt. He had not yet achieved the great power that was to come. and you will notice a few alliances between himself and the other gods that might seem a bit strange. And that is because they were still relatively friendly at this particular point in time. That would change dramatically in the future. So, now, on with the story. So, Marduk Amun-Ra tells Horus to take to the skies in the winged disc in order to search for these enemies from the sky. So, Horus does as requested and soon spots these enemies. And he unleashed upon them a storm that could not be seen nor heard, yet brought immediate death to all of them. These days, we would probably classify this weapon as some sort of a DEW, or direct energy weapon, which are high-energy lasers that can inflict immediate and fatal damage without being seen nor heard. So, Horus then flies back to Marduk Amun-Ra's boat, where he is praised for his efforts, not only by Marduk, but also by Thoth. Now, this is basically the first time that I have mentioned Thoth. We've all heard of him from Egyptian texts, but who exactly was he? Thoth, otherwise known as Ningazida, was another son of Enki and the half-brother of Marduk Amun-Ra. As I mentioned earlier, it's very strange to see these two half-brothers working together as allies, but that is an allegiance which would not last. So, Horus is then given the title of Winged Measurer, and the city of Behutet is named after him. Behutet was later renamed Edfu, and it has been dedicated to Horus ever since. Traditional tales tell us that Edfu was also the place where Horus established a divine metal foundry, where unique weapons made of divine metal were forged, and it was also there that Horus trained an army of metal people. There are depictions of them on the temple walls at Edfu, men with shaven heads wearing a short tunic and a deep collar, and carrying weapons in both hands. These Mesenu, as they were referred to, were not only the first human warriors to ever be enlisted by the gods to fight a war, but they were also the first to be trained with weapons made of metal. Once the men were enlisted and trained, this army of gods were ready to advance northward into the heartland of Egypt. And the initial victories I mentioned a few moments ago apparently helped strengthen this alliance of gods, because Inanna Ishtar joined the group at this point. More and more victories were achieved, and at one point, Thoth actually called for a celebration, saying, "O gods of heaven, let your hearts rejoice. O gods of earth, let your hearts rejoice." The young Horus has brought peace, having performed extraordinary feats in this campaign. I wonder just how long it took Thoth to eventually end up eating those words. But that is a story for another time. More battles were won as the army progressed northward. At this point, the verses actually identify these enemies that this band of gods and their human warriors had been pursuing. It was none other than Horus's uncle Seth, or Set, his father's brother, and one of Marduk Amun-Ra's own sons. In the days of antiquity, there were a band of lakes that separated Egypt proper from the Sinai Peninsula, and that was where the final battle in this war took place. And once again, the band of gods led by Horus was victorious. At this point, Seth became so enraged that he called out Horus for a series of one-on-one battles on the ground and in the air, of which Horus was again victorious. And that was the story of the First Pyramid War, which I will examine again on a future episode. So, there you have it, a perfect example of a war waged by the gods. Now, were humans involved? Yes, but the gods were the ones waging war against each other. And they were also the ones ruling Egypt at that time. We discussed on a prior episode how after the flood, the Anunnaki had to find another place to set up their headquarters and rebuild, and how this chosen place was indeed Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. Also, we talked about how Enki, under the name of Ptah, raised the land out of the mud and water left over by the flood by utilizing dikes, dams, and land reclamation, which is why Egypt's nickname is the Raised Land. Enki's symbol has always been the serpent, and likewise Ptah's symbol was the serpent. Enki was the great engineer who basically planned, built, and established all of the early Anunnaki settlements and operations here on Earth in Mesopotamia. And the Egyptian texts tell us that these early Egyptian gods, such as Enki, came to the area from a place called Ta-Ur, or the faraway land, and that the Ur in that name, Ta-Ur, meant olden. But could that also have been the name of the place they came from? The city of Ur in southern Mesopotamia? And the Straits of the Red Sea, which connected Egypt with Mesopotamia, were known as Ta-Neter, the place of the gods, the passage by which they come to Egypt. That these early Egyptian gods had indeed come from Mesopotamia is supported by the fact that the names of these gods were of Akkadian origins. For instance, the name given to Enki, Ptah, has absolutely no meaning in Egyptian, but it does mean he who fashioned things by carving and opening up in the Semitic languages, and thus Sumerian. 9,000 years after Ptah founded Egypt, Amun-Ra became the ruler. Amun-Ra, son of Ptah, Marduk, son of Enki. And as I have discussed on this program on past episodes, it was the same Anunnaki and basically the same stories no matter where you look in the ancient world. It would be so much easier for everyone to understand all of this if the ancient humans had not renamed all of these gods to suit their own country's languages. If Enlil had not muddled the languages of the humans after the incident at the Tower of Babel, this confusion probably never would have happened, because it makes it extremely hard to decipher which Anunnaki is being referred to at any given point in time, depending on which country and language is being referenced. I get confused sometimes, and I've been studying this information for over 40 years, especially when you start getting into all of the Anunnaki offspring, their children, grandchildren, etc. Mr. Sitchin spends the next 50 pages or so comparing the stories written about these various pantheons throughout time, be it the Greeks, the Hittites, the Hurrians, the Hindus, and on and on. It's a fascinating read, but prepare to be confused, because it will boggle your mind. But the bottom line here is this: it's all the same beings that are being referenced. No matter what ancient text you study, it's all the same Anunnaki gods. Many historians will try to say, no, this god was from the Sumerian pantheon. He or she has no equivalent in the Greek, Egyptian, or Hindu pantheons. It's all bullshit. It's all the same beings no matter what part of the ancient world you are talking about. They are just going by different names. For example, the Egyptians and the Hittites were matching separate but parallel pantheons, and scholars began to wonder what other ancient treaties might reveal. One that provided some surprising information was a treaty made in 1350 BC between the Hittites and the kingdom of Mitanni, which was located on the Euphrates River, midway between the Hittite kingdom and the ancient lands of Sumer and Akkad. This treaty was discovered in recent times, and, like all treaties of that period, it called upon the gods of the contracting parties to be present, to listen, and to serve as witnesses. The gods were then listed as per the custom, nothing really shocking there. But the big surprise came at the end of the tablet, because among the divine witnesses were listed not only their current gods, but the parents and grandparents of these gods, the olden gods, Anu and Antu, Enlil and Ninlil, Enki and Damkina, as well as Ishtar. So there is more proof. Scholars have said it, and it is by now established beyond a doubt that it was in Sumer that the tales of gods and men were first recorded. It was there that numerous texts, more numerous than can be imagined, more detailed than could be expected, were first inscribed. It was there that the written records of history and prehistory on our planet Earth originated. We call them the Earth Chronicles. You know, the discovery and understanding of ancient civilizations has been a process of continuous astonishment and incredible realizations. But what if common folks, i.e., scientists, historians, scholars, are not the only ones studying and researching this topic? What if governments are also looking into this topic? In 1985, Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq, ordered the restoration of the Great Ziggurat in Ur. Even today, you can still see and use the great stairways that he had installed. He believed that Ur was sacred ground, the place where gods once walked. According to the Sumerians, this was the place where the gods once descended, ruled the earth, taught kings, built cities. During the restoration, workers uncovered sealed chambers, rooms not listed on any archaeological plans. Inside, they found strange inscriptions, symbols that didn't match any Sumerian cuneiform, tools and objects made of unfamiliar alloys, burned glyphs resembling stars, gates, and spirals. The site was locked down, workers were reassigned, and equipment removed under military escort. Whatever was found, it never saw the light of day again. After the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, our military did something strange. They built a base right on top of this great ziggurat. Not beside it, not near it, but directly on top of it. The oldest temple in human history turned into a forward operating base. The official story? Logistics, proximity, and coincidence. But the soldiers who were stationed there told a different story. They described areas of the site being cordoned off, patrolled, and off limits. Archaeologists were removed, locals were pushed out, and cameras were banned. Sections of the ziggurat were sealed and covered. One soldier said that it felt like they weren't guarding the monument, but instead guarding something inside of it. If Saddam had found something beneath Ur, then the U.S. came to take it, and the excuse of searching for weapons of mass destruction was nothing more than a smokescreen. And that wasn't all. Within days of the U.S. invasion, the museum in Baghdad was also looted. Among the seized or stolen items were tablets, cylinder seals, and relics inscribed with strange symbology, much of which tied directly to the Anunnaki and the gates of the gods. Multiple independent sources, echoed in classified testimony, claim that, among other things, the U.S. military secured a buried device beneath the sandy soil, a portal, a stargate said to be dormant but recoverable, a device that allowed travel between worlds or dimensions. According to those aligned with this theory, the U.S. government feared that Saddam Hussein had either discovered this artifact or was attempting to activate it. But what if the ziggurat was never just a temple, as I have discussed before? What if it was something more? What if ancients didn't just build monuments, but terminals, interfaces to something larger? There was talk of a stargate, a grid of hidden technology buried between layers of myth. Dr. Michael Salla was one of the first to suggest that the Iraq War may have had other hidden objectives. I remember thinking at the time that it never made any sense to me that Osama bin Laden's base of operations was in Afghanistan, and yet we attacked Iraq? Could it be that the U.S. government was using the 9/11 attacks as an excuse to gain control over an ancient stargate? The idea seems ripped from science fiction, but Salla's theory was drawn from the ancient Sumerian texts and testimony from government whistleblowers who claim that the U.S. military has long been aware of the advanced technology left behind by the Anunnaki. Could it be that this ziggurat, at the ancient site of Ur was also a node in this grid, but a powerful one, and Saddam knew it. That's why he rebuilt Babylon and had his name carved into certain stones and echoed the proclamations of Nebuchadnezzar. He believed that Babylon was rising again and that the grid could be reactivated. As I've covered on this program many times, there are countless ancient texts that speak of gods descending from the sky, the Anunnaki. Are there secrets on this planet concerning them that no one is supposed to find? Whatever was uncovered in the deserts of Iraq, whatever Saddam found beneath the ziggurats and temples, it was something important. The whispers are always the same. Artifacts are taken, sites are sealed, and records are scrubbed. And the world moves on, never asking why. They tell us that the Anunnaki are a myth, that the ancient gods are myths. But I say they were here. Maybe they still are in secret working in the shadows, possibly from hidden bases. And, just maybe, they left something behind. Saddam believed that he was chosen to finish what the ancient kings had started. And, if that belief was based on truth, then the war in Iraq wasn't about controlling the future, it was about rewriting the past, or possibly unsealing it. This story isn't over, because the ziggurats are still there, and possibly whatever's sleeping beneath them hasn't woken up yet. Only time will tell. The monuments of antiquity, pyramids, ziggurats, vast platforms, columned ruins, carved stones, would all have remained enigmas, just mute evidence to bygone events, if it hadn't been for the written word. Without that truth, the ancient monuments would have remained simply puzzles, their age uncertain, their creators obscure, and their purposes unclear. We owe all that we do know to the ancient scribes, these prolific and meticulous people who used monuments, artifacts, foundation stones, bricks, utensils, and more as inviting slates on which to write down names and record events. And, above all, were the clay tablets, flattened pieces of wet clay on which the scribe embossed with a stylus the symbols that formed syllables, words, and sentences. The tablet would then be left to dry, thus creating a permanent record. Records that have survived millennia of natural erosion and the destructiveness of humans. In place after place, in centers of commerce or administration, in temples or palaces, all over the ancient Near East, there were both state and private archives full of such tablets. Not to mention actual libraries where tablets, tens of thousands of them, were neatly arranged by subject. Their contents were listed, their scribe named, and sequel numbered. And invariably, whenever they dealt with history or science or the gods, they were identified as copies of even earlier tablets. Tablets written in the olden language. As astounded as the archaeologists were to uncover the grandeur of Assyria and Babylon, they were even more puzzled to read inscriptions describing even older cities. And what was the meaning of the title King of Sumer and Akkad that the kings of these empires coveted so much? It was only with the discovery of the records concerning King Sargon of Akkad that modern scholars were able to convince themselves that a great kingdom had indeed arisen in Mesopotamia half a millennium before Assyria and Babylonia flourished. It was with great amazement that scholars read in these records that Sargon defeated Uruk and tore down its wall, and that Sargon, king of Akkad, was victorious over the inhabitants of Ur. The scholars were incredulous. Could there have been urban centers, walled cities, even before Sargon of Akkad, even before 2500 BC? As it is now known, indeed there were. There were the cities and urban centers of Sumer, the land where civilization began nearly 6,000 years ago, where suddenly and inexplicably, as through out of nowhere, there appeared a written language and literature, kings and priests, schools and temples, doctors and astronomers, high-rise buildings, canals, docks and ships, intensive agriculture, advanced metallurgy, a textile industry, trade and commerce, laws and concepts of justice and morality, and tales of history and prehistory. In all of these writings, the same facts emerge as an unshakable tenet of the Sumerians and the peoples that followed them. In bygone days, the Din-Gur, or righteous ones of the rocket ships, the beings that the Greeks began to call gods, had come to Earth from their own planet. And they chose southern Mesopotamia to be their home away from home. They called the land Ki-En-Gur, or Land of the Lord of the Rockets, and they established there the first settlements on Earth. And this statement, that astronauts from another planet were the first to establish settlements on Earth, was not made lightly by the Sumerians. In text after text, whenever the starting point was recalled, it was always this: 432,000 years before the deluge, the Din-Gur, or righteous ones of the rocket ships, came down to Earth from their own planet. The leader of these astronauts who came to Earth from Nibiru, as I stated before, was Ea, and after he landed and established Eridu, the first Earth station, he assumed the title of Enki, or Lord of Earth. The texts tell us of Enki's extraordinary efforts to build waterworks in the marshlands at the head of the Persian Gulf. He surveyed the marshlands, cut canals for drainage and water control. He built dikes, dug ditches, and built structures of brick molded from the local clays. He joined the Tigris and Euphrates rivers by canals, and at the edge of the marshlands he built his home with a wharf and other facilities. And all of this was done for a reason. Gold was desperately needed on his planet Nibiru, not for jewelry or other frivolous uses, but to save the atmosphere of their planet, which was dissipating. The intention was to suspend these gold particles into their waning atmosphere to shield it from further decay. And as the son of Nibiru's ruler Anu, Enki was well chosen for this mission. He was a brilliant scientist and engineer. The original plan was to extract the gold from the quiet waters of the Persian Gulf and the adjoining shallow marshlands that extended from the Gulf into Mesopotamia. But the gold production in that area was far below expectations. So, to speed things up, more astronauts, the rank and file Anunnaki, were sent down to assist. They came in groups of 50, and one of these groups was led by Enki's firstborn son, Marduk. Eventually, the Anunnaki moved the mining operations to the Abzu in South Africa, where greater quantities of gold were more easily obtainable. Did you know that in the Semitic languages that evolved from Sumerian, the name of gold was Za'ab, or Absu in reverse? And it has remained the word for gold to this very day. And that is where I will leave you for this episode. You have quite a lot to digest there, and we have so much more to cover and learn. I'm Mad Mark, and I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. And also, please tell your friends and help spread the word about this program. Also, if you have any questions regarding the content discussed here, just message me through madmarktv.com or on any of my social media platforms. I also wish to remind everyone that listening to this podcast is no excuse to not read the book that we are discussing here, The Wars of Gods and Men by Zecharia Sitchin. It is an amazing work, and I am leaving out much information in order to keep the show moving properly, so do yourselves a favor and read that book. Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth is written and produced by me, Mad Mark. Today we have taken yet another step in our ongoing journey to discover the truth. I promise you that things will get more and more interesting the further we delve into this topic of who are the aliens, the history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. Bye for now. You've been listening to Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth with your host, Mad Mark. Join us again on our next program when Mad Mark will once again uncover the answers to the mysteries that puzzle mankind.